Shalom, everybody.
Shalom.
Shalom, everybody. And welcome to the UK-focused live panel at the 2020 TLV ConTech and PropTech Summit. My name is Ofer Forel, and I'm the head of the Israel Economic Mission to the UK, and I'm honored to be one of the co-organizers of today's panel. Following a wave of innovation in the last decade, which is based upon new uses for data analytics, AI, and augmented reality, the construction industry has transformed itself to a tech-intensified industry, which is ever looking for more and more innovation. Due to this process, as well as the BIM revolution, which is the UK construction industry underwent in the past few years, has positioned the UK as one of the world's centers for construction tech innovation. Nonetheless, at these times, there are only several Israeli companies which work effectively in the UK market, and given the potential, there is plenty of room for other Israeli companies to join them as well. The main agenda of our panel today, which is co-organized with Finola Hogan, Managing Director of Goldacre Ventures and Relab, is to bridge the gap of knowledge between Israeli construction tech companies and the UK market. In order to do so, Finola brought together a dream team of UK construction professionals and an Israeli company which successfully penetrated the UK market. I would like to take this opportunity and thank our panelists for taking time of their busy schedules and joining us today. And thank again Finola Hogan for our panel moderator for her cooperation in making this happen. So without further ado, Finola, I would like to forward you the moderating for today's panel.
Thank you, Ofer, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. I hope only that we will live up to the expectations that you've set for us. It's a real pleasure to be here for all of us and to have this opportunity to share with everybody who's joined the Zoom or who will listen to it later, some of the thoughts and experiences of the UK construction and PropTech world, and also some of the experiences both from the industry and from the startup side of how best to engage with that sector in the UK. As you said, we have a dream team panel, and I'm really lucky that they found the time to join me today. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. But just before I do that, just to tell you a little bit about who I am. So I'm Finola Hogan. I lead early stage investment at Goldacre, which is a venture capital investor. And I also run Relab, which is an ecosystem that aims to bring together industry, entrepreneurs and investors so they can collaborate both to help startups scale more quickly, but also to help innovation scale across our industry. And luckily for me, a number of the people who've joined us here today are wonderful supporters and participants in that ecosystem. In terms of our investment focus, we look at sustainable tech, construction tech, smart buildings, smart cities, so very much in the areas we're talking about today. And we like to join startups on that part of their journey that's broadly late seed, early Series A. So to hand you over to our panel to introduce themselves, maybe perhaps I can come to you, Tony, first, and then we'll go around everybody.
Okay, thanks. My name is Tony Gosling. I'm Chief Digital Officer for RSBG Infrastructure. And RSBG is a holding company that has multiple engineering and architecture firms in the UK, Germany, and the Middle East. In the UK, we've got 7 firms, about 1,000 people. Hal Frischman Consulting Engineers, probably the best known. And there I'm responsible for making our businesses more digital, adopting digital technology to improve the way we service our clients. I also co-chair RSBG Ventures, which is our startup investment firm. And we have invested in a number of Israeli companies, including Datamate, who I see are on the agenda today elsewhere. So we're sort of a corporate VC, investing in companies where they help our existing companies to digitize or to exploit the market.
Thank you, Tony. Avi, could I come to you next as the startup on the panel?
Sure. Thank you. So I'm Aviv Libovici. I'm one of the 3 co-founders of BuildDots. We started this company somewhere around 2.5 years ago, and we are very much focused in the UK, which is of course part of the reason why I'm on this panel. And in 2 minutes, maybe what we do is we take 360-degree hard hat mounted cameras. We allow the site team to walk around with those mounted on their hard hats or whoever it is from that team. And we then take those videos and analyze them in a very, let's call it BIM-based process to understand exactly where that camera was at any point in time and what's going on in that area. So we then get to this very accurate view of what's happening on project, what is done, what is not, what is missing, what is incorrect, et cetera, which is the tool that we provide to the site team.
Thank you, Aviv. Steve, maybe I'll come to you next. Steve, I think you might be on mute. Still on mute. Maybe Tim, can I come to you and then we'll come back to Steve because it seems to be coming on and off mute for some reason.
Yeah, of course. So good morning. I'm Tim Peacock and I work for a business called Landsec or Land Securities. I am a long title, so I look after something called open innovation. But more broadly, that means that I have responsibility for working with technology startups and really thinking about how they can help Landsec as a business through the large portfolio of both office and retail properties that we own. So if you don't know Landsec, we have a portfolio of about 24 million square feet across predominantly London and regional centres in the UK. And our core business really is developing new spaces for people and then operating those spaces through the life cycle of those assets. So as I mentioned, more latterly, my role has been around understanding how data and digital actually can help Landsec and more broadly real estate. So this for me is very much the beginning of that journey, and hopefully today we can explore some of the themes that I've bumped into inside Landsec.
Wonderful, thank you. Steve, have we got liftoff, I wonder?
Yes, I'm hoping you can hear me now.
Amazing.
Thank you very much, Fionnuala. Yes, my name's Steve Hawthorne. I'm a construction director for Mace, and Mace are a London-based company that are sort of expanded globally, about £2 billion turnover a year in construction delivery. We actually work and constantly in pursuit of a better way, so that finds me very much in the innovation world and the startups and trying to find better ways of delivering construction and more certainty to my clients, and that's why I've been invited along today. Thank you.
Super, thank you. So before we dive right into it, we have a lot to cover. Just to give people who are listening in a quick sense of how we're going to structure this panel, Offer has asked us to focus on two things. One, the landscape, and then secondly, the experience and advice for companies coming to the UK. So we'll kind of look at each one separately and take a little bit of time on both. Then we'll move to Q&A, though we may pick up the odd question as we go through as well. And I think you can type questions as we go into the chat box on Zoom, and Offer's going to help us keep an eye on that. And then we'll end the panel by just coming to everybody for two final thoughts. One on the technology that most excites them or that they would like to see in the industry, and two on their top tip to a startup coming to the UK. So diving straight in on the landscape, of course, one of the first things we all find ourselves talking about when we talk about construction tech and prop tech is, what is construction tech? What is prop tech? And actually, are they separate at all? Or in fact, is that differentiation a myth? And Tim, I'd be really interested to hear from you how you see that and what you see those things meaning.
Sure. So I think both terms are fairly provocative because they imply that they are things in themselves. When I talk about prop tech, really, I think what we're talking about are those technologies that have really understood the use of data inside real estate. When we talk about prop tech, what we're really talking about is people, is technologies that help people. And the reason I make that differentiation is actually I think that the exciting bit is where those two things come together. So how can we better use data, which ultimately is about reducing risk, and how do we better use the people that we have inside this industry, which is very much people heavy, and ultimately reduce costs and probably risk as well, if we're honest with ourselves. So I don't think that they are separate things in reality. I think they're just two different flavors of the same problem. Ultimately, how can we use data and technology to reduce cost and risk? The reason I think they exist as two separate terms, is so that people can build those lovely charts out with logos on that show all the different types of companies that exist within them. But it's a marketing activity. From a real estate developer's perspective, there's no real differentiation between the two. I think what's nice about those two elements of differentiation, though, is how they blend together. So I mentioned the kind of intersection between the two, and I think you have to add probably fintech into that as well. So a lot of the technologies that are going to come along and help our industry probably already sit inside fintech, if you think about things like blockchain and some of those technologies.
Wonderful, thank you. And if I may jump across to you, Tony, because I know one of the things that you think about a lot is how to link the pieces of the chain. And what Tim, I think, is starting to say is actually we're really talking about the same thing, just different parts in the journey.
To an extent, yes, but I think it's also worth bearing in mind that the companies that are interested in construction and prop tech, and indeed the people you're selling to in client organizations, tend to be different. And across all sorts of industries, the people who deal with new projects, capital projects, construction, or I've worked in shipbuilding, trains and military equipment, it's all the same, tend to be different from the people who understand the day-to-day operations and are tasked with that. And so I think when you try and join across the life cycle, you run into problems in all sorts of companies. It's in water, it's in roads, it's in almost anything else. The functions that deal with operating a building and the functions that deal with constructing it are often different people with different aims. So I absolutely agree they should be linked. I think there's enormous power to linking design to operation, or what I found culturally, behaviourally and organisationally in a lot of organisations. People who build things often don't talk to those that operate them, don't really take the time to understand what they're going to need, and don't really take the time to build it in. And so it depends sometimes on the kind of developer as well. Sometimes the developer has no interest in how the building is going to be used. It's about building it, selling it, moving it on. Tim and Landsec are different in that sense, in that they've got a longer term view. So when I've been looking to introduce construction tech or property tech into a construction type operation, I'm looking for clients that have a long-term interest, that have an incentive or a value delivery from reducing energy use or making the building more compelling. Or I'm doing some interesting stuff at the moment around digital customer experience and really being able to turn data into money over the long term for a landlord.
Thank you. And that kind of in a way leads us rather nicely to, you know, where the sector might actually be today. And I know when we talk about the real estate and infrastructure sectors, there tends to be sometimes a sense that, you know, in that story of the tortoise and the hare, that maybe real estate is more of a tortoise in how it approaches and adopts innovation. But there's also a sense of that really changing at the moment. And I'd be really curious, you know, to hear from all of you where you would see now the sector at the moment in terms of innovation, where it's going, and what the challenges currently are. Steve, is that something you'd like to maybe kick us off on?
Yeah, sure. I'm certainly biased towards the construction delivery. It's where I spend most of my time, and I think Tony's right, where we are starting to do soft landings and starting to think about end users, and they're joining us through a journey sometimes 6 months before completion so that we deliver this in the right way. But our whole delivery model is changing so fast. I'm probably running 9 new systems down here in one single project of £40 million, 7 of them for the first time, and 4 of them considered as start-ups. So I think we're in the right ballpark of changing what we need to do. But digital-wise, now we are actually getting much more certainty from the BIM world that we can fabricate things away from site with the confidence it's going to fit into the millimetre accuracy on site. And that's changing our whole model. We want to actually do more making things away from site, building assembly things on site. And we're doing that to such an extent that, an example, for, we've just done a 30-storey building in Stratford here in London, and we are putting on floor by floor in a period of 26 hours, and the whole fit out of that area gets done within a 1 week period. So we've gone up 11 weeks it's taken us to do 10 stories. Now that is just like phenomenal in the rate of construction and the difference that we're now doing. And that's taken so many people from different sectors and BIM modeling and last planning and all these other tools that everybody's offering us as an industry. But now we've got the confidence to do it. We're almost certainly demolishing a building, while at the same time we're testing off-site our pump sets and our off-site prefabrication. And Mace now do a prefabrication strategy from day one, where they're actually trying to find what we can't prefab. You know, we almost want to drop the building in as a single unit and then we start breaking it down. So the least we do on site, the more predictability, the better sustainability, the higher quality, the more certainty. And this is now taking a whole new direction. So you can see just in a single project, 9 new innovations are on the way and 9 systems I've never used before. And I've been building for 37 years. So it's a fast changing industry and you have to keep up.
Wow, that sounds incredibly exciting. Aviv, you're selling into, in fact, people exactly like Steve and the sites that he's talking about. Be interesting to hear what your experience is from the other side.
Yeah, sure. I think that this might not be the most PC thing to say on this call, but when we just started and we spoke to investors here in Israel, which were not necessarily that familiar back then with the construction industry, they looked at us and said, oh, wait, why construction? What does that industry know about tech? Why would you do that? And sort of tried to make us understand that might not be the way. And I think that what we've seen in the past 2 years is that they could not have been more wrong. It could be that, I think that back then the Israeli VC industry did not understand construction. But our experience, particularly in the UK, is that the industry just has been waiting for a long time for the right tools to come in. Yes, for a long time, there hasn't been much change, but that was, if you ask me, mainly because the right change was not offered. And what we've seen in the last 2 years, and I think that what we were told by construction people when we just started, is that now is the exact time. And Steve saying that he has so many new systems on one site just shows that. Now is the time this is happening, and the construction industry is embracing this new world that it could have. Of course, with the added statement, they think that it has to be good, it has to be ready. Other industries might be at a position where they can start trying something and building a process together with it, but in construction, at the end of the day, you have the project. And that project has a start date and an end date, and it has to do well. And it's not there for you to experiment with it, and it can't handle that. So I think the requirement from people like myself is a bit higher.
Really interesting. And Tim, you mentioned that digitization and data were a big part now of the thinking, strategic thinking within Landsec. Is that something you can share your thoughts around with us?
Yeah, first of all, I don't want to be too much of a naysayer, but I want to pour a little bit of cold water on kind of Steve's view and it sounds like Mesa doing an amazing panel. But Mesa doing a great job specifically around those projects. But I think as an industry, global industry, I think we are woeful with digital adoption. If you believe the McKinsey report, we're still one up above from hunting, shooting and farming in terms of how we're using technology to really drive efficiency, decrease risk, all the kind of things from a business benefit that we want to do. So I think we have a long way to go. And I think, to use an analogy, there are definitely some green shoots there, and things like this conference show that, there's money and investment going into these types of technologies, but we have a long way to go. And I think the challenge is, up until now, there's been no real need to change. Construction, has had innovation within it, but in the types of materials we use and how we build buildings. But in reality, we still throw up a building using scaffolding and various other bits of engineering that have been around for a long time. So I actually think now is the time for us to change. And I do think there are drivers for that change, but we're completely at the start. And for me, the thing that's happened is everybody else has expected everybody else to innovate. So if you think about the broader supply chain, as sitting at the top of that pile as a developer and an owner, we expect the supply chain to innovate, whereas the supply chain expects the people with the bigger contracts, i.e. us, to innovate. And we kind of got in this stalemate around, well, who's actually doing the innovation and ultimately who benefits? And I think that benefit piece has been the critical bit that is now starting to change. I think as an industry, we're recognizing that we have no choice but to do things better, and we will all benefit. And taking that kind of much more collegiate and collaborative approach to innovation, rather than it being about individuals or individual businesses being the ones that need to fund that innovation. But I think that ultimately the adoption rate of change and that rate of change needs to change and needs to significantly accelerate inside our industry, because we have to start showing the way. We've got we'll come on to drivers later on, but we have some huge responsibilities inside this industry, and we have to start somewhere.
Well, as you know, music to my ears when people start to talk about collaboration. And Steve, actually, if you could organise for a cup of tea into all of us, that would be fantastic.
Typical builder, did you see that? You see the builder getting his tea.
I like that.
Pernilla, on the data and digital point, sorry, I didn't cover that specifically, just very quickly on data. The reason I get really excited about real estate, and certainly real estate data, is arguably it's the last untapped source of unstructured data left in the world. And I think if you look at why a lot of the PropTech, and the point I made right at the beginning around PropTech and data, is that the smart people, the engineers, have recognized that that data is untapped, and there are clearly things that we can do with it. Going back to challenges, one of those challenges ultimately is there are lots of solutions out there looking for problems where people have discovered those pockets of data and believe we can do something with it. We're just not quite sure yet. So data is a huge opportunity in many ways, and there's so much of it. We just need some smarter people than me to work out what to do with it.
Brilliant. And just moving across to that point of drivers, and potentially also picking up on the questions of sustainability and regulation. Tony, can you share with us what you're seeing? Because I know you're involved in innovation really across Europe on some of these areas. What are you seeing as being the drivers that are going to push this change and this pace?
Okay, just linking to the previous bit, I think the industry is backward on digitization. It is starting to move quite fast. What's helping to make it fast, there's layers to this. So some of the first requirement, as people talk, at least from the construction tech point of view, is to have some digital data, is to have some models and process that you can start to build on. And that's in place largely in the UK, amazingly, thanks to a bit of government pushing 5 or 6 years ago with the BIM mandate. But people are largely comfortable with that stuff. Still further to go. The drivers for doing things with that, unless you've got that basic foundation, you can't do any of the fancy stuff. And I have to say the economic drivers for that, it largely makes sense. I think there's still sectors that find they produce models that don't end up being used in construction. There's woeful use of data, particularly to learn and improve over time. And one of the things I find most frustrating about the construction industry is each project seems to typically start up, finish without ever sharing data or learning from other projects. And I particularly look for clients that have a pipeline of projects that they can share data and learn from. Why are people doing digital stuff? It has to make a difference within the commercial constructs that we typically have now. And one of the reasons why construction has been slow to take digital stuff on is the traditional way of buying construction has a bunch of different parties and a bunch of different stage gates. And sitting as a designer, I can make big differences to the construction cost, but I get no benefit from it. And if it increases the cost of design, then many clients will tell us not to do it. I think there's huge benefits to be had from construction, from joining up, design, simulating the construction process and getting real collaboration on data. But where we're seeing most breakthrough actually is where time is critical to people, because you can take time out of the process, often much easier than you can take end cost out or with believability on it. So people who have an urgency because they need the building up to generate revenue. So we're doing a lot of innovation with data centers at the moment, big boom in data center construction. Time matters, urgency matters. I think where you get real digital transformation is when you start to change the business model. And that's where the modularization stuff that Steve was talking about starts to come in, where actually you've got the digital basics to start to change how the construction site operates. The early moves have all been about living with the way the industry works and just adding in some digital stuff to deal with some pain points and to make things better. But I think there's now real opportunities to start to make the building better. Where I do get frustrated, it seems to me that if you're doing a major building, get the people who are going to use it to visualize in virtual reality to part of the design process. You can make a better building. It's really hard to prove the financial payback on that, but you could get a building that suits the people who are going to actually live and work in it, rather than something that was designed by designers to standards and for the convenience of designers. So I think there's big advantage on that. One thing I've seen in the past year that's astonished me really is the big push towards carbon and embedded carbon in construction and reducing the operating costs. We're seeing some companies, a lot of companies start to think about zero carbon and net zero and start to move to that. Fundamentally, any new tech has to overcome a bunch of resistance, and therefore it's got to be worthwhile doing. You've got to be able to find somebody who cares enough and gets enough of that value to do it. And a lot of the challenges that I spend my time working on is trying to join up the people who benefit to make sure that collectively we can do something that requires people to work together in a more digital way, where ultimately the client benefits, but maybe doesn't recognize it or has commercial constructs that actually doesn't incentivize anybody to improve.
Thank you. I mean,
a bit of a rant.
No. And I think that whole question of who benefits and how to make those links is something we'll probably talk about even more when we sort of come on to the second part of this panel, which I think we're going to do really shortly. I'm very conscious of time passing, but maybe Steve, I might hand the baton to you to maybe any closing thoughts on this whole question of landscape and innovation and where we're going and where we're at.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I agree with Tim. I'm siloed in my one of the best delivery companies, and there's probably 5 of us sit up there, and we all work with Landsec, so we think everybody below us must be doing the same thing, and that quite definitely not, as you can see when you walk around. And this client benefits, who benefits, and the big one was about the BIM model in the first place, because it has to start with the BIM model, and then it gets handed to us, and we make most use of it, de-risk the project, get most profit, and then hand it to the client as this massive beast that nobody can drive. But we say a client is worth £300,000, but actually reality is, the very small part he pays doesn't really work that well. So yeah, we've got clients investing with us in research and development and data centres, as Tony said. We've gone data centres in Ireland, won't name the client, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And by the time we got to 5 and 6, 35% improvements in programme. And that's all working together and building bespoke tractor bases and making everything in a little factory on the side and just driving it through these big doors. It's such an interesting time for the industry. But yeah, if we lead the way, I'm hoping to, and we can get others to follow.
Thank you. So I think really the big messages that we're hearing here is that we're in an industry that is really at the beginning of a journey, adopting innovation now at a really increasing and accelerating pace, but with enormous opportunity. So not surprising, perhaps, that the UK, along with, of course, the US, is an area that a lot of Israeli startups look to when they start to look at international expansion or first customers outside their home market. And then we're going to spend the second part of this session just learning from the people on this panel as to how you might actually get into that market more efficiently, how you might make that a successful bridge across. And to kick that off, I absolutely want to hear the story of Aviv, who I know your first customer was in fact a UK customer. So it'd be great to hear what your experience was and what the motivation was for that.
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, yeah, that's true. Our first, I think our first 3 customers were in the UK and only the 4th in Israel. As a company, that's the way we grew. And I think that day one, when we were just 3 guys with no money and looking to do something, we came to the UK because for us it was about finding the right balance between culture and language, because we understand English, and to work in somewhere else in Europe would be more difficult. But also, very importantly, to be, let's call it close to home, maybe not at home, but close to home, because we believe that the way that construction, let's call it, runs, and the way that it needs to be built, a product like ours has to be very much hand in hand with the clients. So if we're looking at English-speaking and progressive countries and looking at the UK and the US, so for us to be very close to our clients in the US would be very difficult. But to be very close to clients in the UK is a lot more realistic. And I actually spent the better part of 6 months flying back and forth every week, which obviously I would not do to the US. And the final part, which at least for us was very, very big, is that we needed to work with an industry that already understands tech and specifically understands BIM. And that position of the UK that already you walked around and just even the fact that everyone knew what BIM is when you speak to anyone in the industry 2 or 3 years ago, and projects with BIM were already a thing, and tablets were on site, and every site manager has one. And all of that sort of, let's call it advancements that were even those a few years ago was very big for us. And then that's why we targeted the UK and started acting there in whichever way possible, let's call it. Of our first 3 clients, one was a random LinkedIn conversation that turned into from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, and then getting in touch with the company. One was someone we met on an open doors tour and took it from there, where we came to learn. It's just all sort of opportunities that come from everywhere, let's call it.
Thank you. That's really insightful and very interesting, really, to hear what the draws were. Tony, I know you similarly have worked with a lot of companies, particularly talked to a lot of companies from Israel that have looked at the UK. What's your experiences of why it might be a good first market for an Israeli startup?
I think it's fair to say Israel isn't large enough as a market on its own for most of the startups. And so quite quickly, a lot of startups have to move to a bigger market. I think when you look at the options, the English language really helps. So with one of our startups, we did a number of projects in Germany and quite quickly hit some language barriers and challenges there. Actually, in one of the projects, ended up using Russian as the project language because there were people in Germany and Israel on the Israel teams who could speak with that. I think the UK market is not too big. The challenge with the US market is it's not really one market. It's a large market, it's a regional market, it's a hell of a beast to go after. And the UK is not too big, is, as we've said, starting to open up, is probably more open for digital innovation than the vast majority of markets around the world. And I know the German market well, the Emirates, Dubai is relatively open for changes, and that's starting to very much open up for Israeli companies in the last couple of months. And then you have, if you go into mainland Europe, you have language challenges, but also some specific challenges in particular markets. Germany has a lot of rules, a very traditional way of doing things. It's a hard market to change in. I think the UK is a nice mix for culture, for language, for distance, and for the fact that the UK is starting to change, and it is probably one of the most open markets for digital construction and PropTech around.
Brilliant. So of course, the question at the forefront of any startup's mind is, how do I get that customer or how do I get that pilot? And then how do I build on that so that I can get an enterprise customer and then hopefully start rocking and rolling, as they say. And maybe, Tim, I might come to you and start. I mean, each of the panelists, just for the people listening in, each of the panelists works really closely with a large number of startups, and many of those startups move from pilots to contracts and more deeply within the organization. So it'd be really interesting to hear the different experiences of all three, and that should give a lot of insight into how to make those connections. So Tim, if I can start with you, that would be wonderful.
Sure. So from my perspective, the world of startups really is about credibility and capability. So there's two kind of broad buckets. What can you do and how well can you do it? And they're both equally important. Now, as a startup, typically you don't necessarily have that credibility piece. You may not have done this before for other organizations. So that's usually the area that I would certainly help startups coming into businesses like Lansec. How do we build that level of credibility so you can essentially prove what you say you can do in a real kind of client environment? And ultimately, that's where the pilot comes in, and being able to demonstrate your technology, your process in a real world environment, and start to show the benefits that you think that your technology that you can bring. That sounds fairly straightforward and fairly formulaic. What I would suggest are there's some things that you shouldn't do. So first of all, please don't spam organizations with sales contacts, with LinkedIn requests, with emails, with phone calls. It's the most irksome, annoying behavior that gets you off on completely the wrong footing. So I would suggest, going back to that kind of like credibility and capability piece, find a sponsor inside the business that you are that you're wanting to target, and work with that sponsor and really put some time and effort into that relationship. For all of the things we just talked about in terms of technology and forward thinking, the UK is a very old-fashioned place to do business. It's all about relationships. It's all about trust, because ultimately in the world of startups, if you find someone like me inside Lansec, I'm also staking part of my reputation inside that business on you and what you're capable of doing. So build those relationships and put time into those relationships, because they will definitely reap rewards in the long run. Another thing to think about is be realistic about your aspirations and goals inside businesses like Lansec. So think about starting small and being able to grow over time. Don't necessarily think that you have to sell an enterprise license of the thing that you have off the bat, because it's not going to happen. So be realistic about the time you're willing to put into a business, about the relationship that you're looking to build, and ultimately what's in it for both parties. I've already mentioned that partnership is critical to startups working well inside the UK, and really do see it as a partnership. Think about things like co-creation. Think about how you can further not only your own business and career, but also how your customer and your partner benefit. I think the final thing I'd say, Fionnuala, is you're in good company in the UK just because of businesses like Sidewalk Labs and Katira, and those really massive technology businesses who are really investing in the UK and see the UK construction and property sector as the next big thing outside the US. I don't want us to be seen as the poor man's US, but many technology companies certainly put us in that category.
Thank you, Tim. Steve, so how would you describe the Mace experience?
Well, if you've got 6,000 people all in pursuit of a better way, you see we probably all, as individuals, have ideas and trying to improve things and have contacts, and there's a lot going on of change at any one stage, and it is the one that goes viral, where you can see it's when we talk to each other and say, yeah, every site needs one of these. And that tends to be, your product's got some legs. There's a lot of people coming to us with very similar products to stuff we're already trialing. There's a lot of people coming to us with things that, make our life more difficult, and we have to try them out. We have to find our way of doing things. And some of them are really good. And I think if you can see we are, as a nation, UK saying all of our projects are going to be BIM standards. We're all going to have BIM projects. That's a great market because we've got no choice. Everyone has to be. And now we're all going for the carbon targets to be carbon neutral, and Mace are saying that all of our suppliers are going to be carbon neutral, or they won't be on our supply chain. Now that's a massive drive, and there are opportunities to see how do you help us do that? How do we drive that? How do we know we're doing that? Because we want to make sure that the measures we're doing are actually valid. So there's lots of opportunities to come in to do us. People come to us as individuals, but we, like Lansec, we have individuals for innovation, and they're out in the market. And if you take a couple of examples, the ones I find, it's actually coming to people like yourself, Fionnuala and Tony, who are actually saying, you know what, I think Steve might just want to see if it's got any legs and test it past me. And nearly all the time, it's at least worth a 3 or 4 months trial, like we did QFlow here. And actually QFlow, fantastic project, but actually made my life really difficult. So I'm chasing up all these non-compliant companies companies that are trying to deliver to a site, but it's actually realizing how bad I was before. So it's a really good thing, and to see that when I first look at it, I'm thinking, oh, you know, this sounds really interesting. Afterwards, I'm thinking I need a full-time person just to get the people that are non-compliant. So sometimes it might not look until you've tested it, but actually you're talking to people who are out there trying to change the industry. So I'm really welcome to it, and I love giving these little trials and we go through them. Not all successful. We don't all have legs when we start, but I think there's a lot of companies that I see around my circle that are at least trying to do things better. Yeah.
Wonderful. And just a quick follow-up to that, Steve. If I, as a startup, want to sort of find my way into the Mace ecosystem, is a good starting point basically targeting some of the things that you've flagged as being real concerns for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're all where our focus is now, and we're all talking internally about how we get to these targets, and you know, genuinely finding improvements in what we do. So yeah, we're putting the feelers out. We're finding a lot of these things through other construction circles. But yeah, as Tim says, cold calling, sending 6,000 emails, it just goes into the junk folder. We can't respond to that amount. So yeah, and I even coming on this forum, I've had like 30 or 40 requests for meetings today. I wish I had all the time for it, but it really shows how interested they are in actually talking to us and getting that half hour. And I have arranged quite a few, but not all of them, and mainly because I'm in the construction side as opposed to the end user side. But yeah, it's a really interesting to see how much people want to talk to us as well.
Brilliant. And Tony, just coming to you from the RSBG perspective, what advice would you give to startups wanting to connect into your ecosystem and ideally have you as a customer?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of stages. The first thing is to try and get somebody to try it. And then I act essentially as an advocate for startups, in some ways a gatekeeper, I guess, but also when I find something, actually helping them to navigate into the organization and find the right project or the right place to try it. And I've certainly learned over the years that you can spend, I've worked for some large government organizations, and we could spend a year discussing and writing papers about something. I'd much rather just give it a try and get a sense of if it works or not. So there is absolutely that point about building relationships. Try and understand someone's business and what they want out of it. It does amaze me, the calls I have with people where they launch straight into a pitch without any attempt to understand what might be useful to us or to them. You know, it's got to be tailored. It's got to be aimed at the things that matter to me. And so that first hurdle, I think, is very much understanding the market, building the network, finding a few people who are going to have the right economic drivers that your solution helps with, that you're actually helping them to solve a problem. Part of me over the years of introducing new services and solutions has not been clear whether sometimes there's a tendency to push a methodology or product or technology, and largely people don't care about the product, the technology, or being the first to try machine learning on a construction site or whatever. What they want is solutions to their problems. So you've got to take the time to understand the problems and be able to find somebody who has those problems and then show them how it can be a solution. And that to me is really important. I think there's then a chasm between the try it once and quite like it, you know, maybe sponsored by an innovation unit or whatever, and getting something into normal use, that it becomes embedded, it just becomes the way things are done. And that takes persistence and a bit of luck and a decent amount of time. This is a business-to-business sale. It takes time. Sales cycles are long. Project life cycles are long. It'll take a bit of time to find the right people and the right project and to start to build that momentum. And you have to be patient, persistent, but patient. And I suppose the final point I'd like to make is go into this with a kind of open mind. Quite a few of the startups I've looked at have a pivot at some point. And I generally consider that a good thing. People tend to go after a problem very broad, not really fully understanding the market and the thing they're going after. And there's a long history in startups of finding that the initial problem you thought you're solving isn't really the best problem, or the initial market you're going after isn't really the best market. So be willing to shape and change direction if actually you find out that the real thing, the real opportunity for you is a bit different. And so I think the best pilots are very much listening mode and understanding and trying and learning, not just pushing a defined product into a client and expecting them to like it. It's got to be tailored.
On that, Tony, the only thing I would add is don't break your business for the benefit of your customer. Exactly. So it's a fine line, isn't it, between stick to your guns versus be flexible.
Yeah. And getting that balance right, you're right, is tricky. So this isn't about trying to please every single customer, but certainly a number of the companies we've invested in have changed their model and their market as they've gone. And you have to be open.
Brilliant. So it feels like some very big and very consistent messages there from everybody, which are remembering it's all about trust and relationships. So build the relationships and please don't spam with marketing emails, I think is a plea from everybody. Think about what's in it for both parties and really try and understand the business and where the point of connection is. You know, there's a lot of big challenges around carbon, around other industry challenges. If you fit into solving some of those problems, then, you know, there is a bit of an open door. Be persistent. You know, once that chasm, as Tony calls it, between something being tried and moving to a sort of an enterprise sale, it is a long journey and it is a long sales cycle, and you have to be prepared to do the hard yards and stay with that journey. And then, of course, that whole thing of managing that balance between being open-minded and flexible, but actually also understanding where your true course is. So it's a really wonderful insights there from everybody. And I'd like to just I'm quite conscious of time and leaving enough time for questions, but maybe I'll just come around everybody very quickly once on the question of readiness. Because of course, once you get in the door, there are things I suspect each of our panelists will say will help you get through contracting processes or into the business more easily. So maybe if each person could share one thought about what helps you to be ready when you make that successful sale to actually implementing it as quickly as possible. And maybe Steve, I'll come to you and then I'll just go around the table, and Aviv, maybe you can tell us also what is the thing that helped you most as well.
Yeah, I think I've been fortunate that most of them are on their second or third project before I see them, and they don't need that much manipulation, but I've been really excited about how easy they have to incorporate my ideas to make it suit my market better and just tweak it slightly. And they're all very up to that, as I think, as Tim and Tony says, you have to stand by your guns, but at the same time, make it shaped to fit the tool that you're required, and that's very important for me. So I think having that ability to ask the customer what they need and not to be arrogant and say this is it, is fixed in stone, because I think that would probably not go very far. So yeah, there has been that flexibility has been my one thing.
Brilliant. And Tim, I mean, Landsec is clearly a PLC, so I imagine that there are processes around taking a startup on board that startups can get themselves ready for in advance.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think as a PLC, we're used to contracts to businesses like Mace, where we're talking £100 million of contracts. So if a startup wants to do a 10 grand pilot, it's a bit of a different process. So the thing that trips most people up when I'm working with them is the way in which startups run their own businesses, especially around things like security and cyber. So going back to the point I made right at the beginning, that a lot of this is about data and about trusting a third party with our data that may go into a system. It's making sure that you really understand the security and risk requirements of a business like Landsec before you get into that contracting process. Because if they're not in place, it can be expensive to put right, and also it can cause huge delays to a project. So try and find out from a contracting perspective what the business is expecting, and make sure you've done some of those things before you get into a contracting process.
Brilliant. Tony?
I think you've got to make sure that the fundamental core of the solution works, and that you've thought about some of the practical problems of doing it on site. I completely agree with the stuff that Tim was talking about with contracts and cyber security, the kind of obvious questions. I think there's also perhaps don't necessarily try and do it all yourselves. There's a lot of, some of this is about an ecosystem, pulling together technologies and building things quickly using some off-the-shelf modules. So I think sometimes there can be a tendency for firms to think they have to build a complete solution. Actually, if you've got the core of something and you can deliver a service that works, of which your novel bit is part of it, but the rest of it's tried and tested, that reduces the risk as well. And that makes it a lot easier, and particularly with cloud these days, the ability to build something that can scale up and has some of the cybersecurity and all the rest of the stuff essentially taken care of by somebody else really helps.
I think that's a really good point, Tony.
It can't fall over on the first day. There's a certain amount of allowance for a startup and a new thing that it's a pilot, and so you can expect some problems, and you go into that with that mindset. But fundamentally, the basic thing has to work.
I think it's recognizing, Tony, that it's also that most businesses will already have fairly established tech platforms in place, and it's how you interact with those or interlink with those. So, not building standalone products for the sake of building standalone products, recognize that people will already have relationships with Autodesk and, and other big players, and how do you ultimately work in that broader tech ecosystem.
Great. And Aviv, to just close this out with you, because you've seen the other side of that, is there something that you wish you had done or that you feel would have made life much easier had you already had it pre-prepared, as they say?
Definitely. Well, first of all, I wish I had the recording of this panel, and the answers of my 3 co-panelists 2 years ago would have really gone a long way. Just as an example, to come first time in front of this thing of saying, well, we know you're a startup, but here's our list of cybersecurity demands. It's like, oh, okay, wait, I need to get my head around this now and figure it out, because, we're a startup, 10 people doing the programming. We haven't really touched on that at that point, and things like that. But I think that the core thing for me is to understand that no matter what you think or what you think is good or right, you're probably wrong, unless you're a startupist, but you're actually Steve here, who has the 30 years of experience in the industry and knows what it is. Then you're probably wrong and have not the most accurate perspective of things. And I think my best example of that is that I could see, both from my own experience or experience of others in this construction tech industry, how you might come in with something and you have a very, very clear explanation of why it's good, of why it has a good return on investment, why it's a good tool to use. And actually, you might be right. You might be precisely right, and it is a good tool, but it solves an issue that, for people like my co-panelists here, is number 7 on their things to worry about. Yes, it is a good improvement, but actually, I have much bigger issues to tackle here. So this is not where I'm going to put my focus on. So the ability to understand that you have to come in with confidence in what you have, but with the willingness to adapt and to understand the needs and to know that you don't know, is, I think, really critical.
That's a wonderful note to, I think, end this part of the session on. I can't believe how quickly time has gone, and I suspect we could probably keep going for a lot longer, but I think that might get us in a lot of trouble with Ofer and Noah. So there's 2 questions in the Q&A and the chat, which I'm going to very quickly pick up on. One is, what are the project management softwares most commonly used in your projects currently? And Steve, I think that is a question made for you. And you're on mute.
Right, got it back there.
And could you maybe give us the top 5? Conscious of time.
Project management, yes. Well, everybody is using the Prince 2 type of project management delivery, which I don't come across very much in MES. Really, for us, it's down to the last planning software. Like, we use the programming P6 and Asta to do our programs on. Now we've started to use things like Visualine, which is taking those Gantt charts and putting some sense to them and make ready needs and things like that as well. So yeah, I think probably as a wide business, we probably have them in every site. It's such a big organization, but the ones that I'm particularly using here are Nuriva span walls, Nerali wall for post-it notes, electronic post-it notes, which is really exciting the first time I've seen them. Post-it notes that actually give us production percentages. And yeah, there's so many different ones. As I say, the 9 that I have live here, probably 13 in total, are all very good innovatives, and they all fall under that category one way or another.
Thank you. And there's a second question here, which I think I'm going to direct to Tim first, but it may not be you may decide to redirect it. You get one redirect.
Let's see what the question is first.
Light XY, it's in the chat, can project digital blueprints onto the surface. Who do you think is the actual user, the general contractor or the sub, for this kind of tool for indoor application?
So I'm going to chuck that back to Steve in a second, given that ultimately he's the one that will use a blueprint and build buildings. But I think the user is a really interesting concept. So the person actually looking at the technology, is clearly the people on construction sites. But if it's more about the problem we're trying to fix is visibility of what's being built, then the user can be anybody inside that kind of construction process and within the ecosystem. So I think we've got to be careful with the word user and think about more broadly the customer of this type of technology. And ultimately it comes down to data and transparency. Ultimately as a developer, I care about what we said we were going to build versus the as-built and any changes that exist within that. So can that type of technology show me that change and that progression over time and let me manage risk? Then I'm the customer. But ultimately the guys on site will be the ones interacting with that type of technology. Is that fair, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, probably over the years, we've always had the drawings on the wall of one sort. In a really complicated plant room, you'll have all the plans on there where the subcontractor will provide them for that particular plant room, but I'll put the general arrangements for the architect around the building. And yeah, they go out of date and it frustrates the hell out of me. So I suppose if these are not blueprints, projectors that can be pinched or taken away, you're looking at value versus cost. Yeah, it'd be great that every layer of the wall builds up, you've still got this plan on the wall, and as long as we can talk to it and change the revisions as they come in, so it's always current, because that's the frustration, is people will work to the one on the wall. But then we all said when we had the BIM model, we'd use it for dimensions and for drawing, but actually very few of us will get average, perhaps a distance out of there to know, but we would never build to that. We still go back to those drawings. So it is important if they're around there. But again, it's, as Tony touched on, it's value versus what we get back out of that. If the paper one, it will take me the best part of £100 to print my drawings and put them around there. And a good document controller will keep them updated. So that's not a very expensive option. But if you've got a projector, and remember, you're probably needing one in every sort of like corridor, it becomes quite an expensive thing. If you can keep the value down, then I'd love that. Yeah.
Cool. Right, well, I think we're slowly running out of time. I know there's one or two other questions, but we might have to pick them up afterwards. So if I can, as promised, go round to each of you and ask for your one-liner on the tech that most excites you, or indeed that you'd love to see, even if it's not here yet, and your top tip for a startup coming towards the UK. And Tony, I'm going to start with you, since you didn't get to answer the lovely technical questions.
Okay. In terms of tech that hasn't made an impact yet, I think there's robots and construction sites often aren't a good place to put robots. But we have a cluster of companies around robotics and automation, so I'm keeping quite a view on the space, and robots being used for painting and drywalling and window cleaning and stuff like that. I'd like to see more robots on construction sites, I think. In terms of top tips, I think... Just one. Yeah, I think the key one, and it's one we found difficult, is to be able to express the value really clearly and simply, and the value of what you deliver. And I might almost use that light YX as an example. It really depends. Who gets value from this? And is it big enough for someone to change? And if you can't articulate that clearly, simply in an elevator pitch, then you'll really struggle.
Brilliant. Thank you. Aviv.
Yeah.
It's unfair to ask you to give top tips to potentially your competitors. Yeah. So there you go.
Yeah, no, that's actually fine. But for reasons of, let's call it lack of objectivity, I'll skip the what tech excites me the most part and go right into saying that I think if there's one tip, is be there. I mean, once you have it, once you're already on a pilot or something, be there, feel it, be there when your new customer pilots are using it, see how it goes, be very, very, very sort of involved in that process. And for me, it has to be one of the co-founders of the company at that early stage also, because you have to be the one who already also understands what you're trying to make of it. Because if you just send something your customer's way and hope that they use it and have fun and pay you some money, I don't think that's going to work.
Thank you, Aviv. Steve?
My dream innovation would be wider roads into London, so I can get bigger prefabricated modules to the site. My top tip for the innovation world of the startups is to understand that we are all trying to do this as a sideline. We've all got day jobs. You need to be doing the legwork. You need to be the one that says, I've got this solution that will take you half an hour and let me run it to you. If you start asking me to design your product, I don't have the time. I've got 250 operatives out on site, and I'll do this as a part-time part of it. So the readiness for me is to say, here is a model, and we can quickly talk it over. And Teams is a great way of doing this all over the world now. So yeah, that's my one thing.
Thank you. And Tim, to close.
I love that. I love that, Steve. I love the don't make me do your job for you. So mine as a closet data techie is very much the untapped benefit from things like machine learning. And I mean, in this instance, true machine learning. We are an industry that is addicted to Excel, and we need to move away from that because other tools are available, spoiler alert. And I want to get to a position where we start using machine learning for its true potential rather than being a buzzword that people use in brochures. So my top tip for those on the call is go and learn about machine learning and stop using it as a buzzword and become an expert.
Wonderful, thank you. So it just remains really for me to say thank you for being the most amazing panel. You've been incredibly generous with your time and your experiences, and a huge thank you. And thank you, Ofer, for inviting us to join you. It's been a real honour. I think we've all enjoyed it.
Thank you. I would just like to echo the very vivid discussion that we had earlier today, that indeed many Israeli startups are approaching their I would say potential partners, or in many cases in LinkedIn, Facebook, emails, phone, fax, etc. And in many cases they are overdoing. And I'd just like to mention that part of the services that we provide in the Israel Economic Mission around the world, not only in the UK, also in France and other places, is that we work together with Israeli startups in order to understand the project, to fine-tune their pitch, to suggest a strategy, etc. In that case, we believe that we are able to bridge the gap between Israeli companies, Israeli technologies, and the needs here in the UK. I would also like to echo you, Finola, and I would like to thank again our distinguished panelists, Tony Goslin, Steve Hawthorne, Tim Peacock, and Aviv Lebovici, for taking a break from their high-tech schedule and joining us in our session today. I would like also to thank you, Finola, for moderating and co-organizing today's panel, which was very successful from my point of view at least. On a final note, today's panel is only a starting point for more activities in the construction tech arena, as well as property tech, which are planned in the future. And our next event will take place in London in 2021. We are optimistic of having it, where we, the Israel Economic and Trade Mission in the UK, as well as the Israel Export Institute, will host the 2021 Israel ConTech and PropTech Innovation Week, which will bring together Israeli startups, UK corporations, investors, and others. So I'd just like to mention that you need to stay tuned for the future and keep up constructing a new technological future. Thank you all very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.